Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Dr. LaShonda Lewis and I am with Round Rock ISD's Counseling Services. We're gonna give a couple more minutes to allow more guests to enter the room. We are recording this session and you will be able to watch the recording by tomorrow afternoon if you go to our Counseling Services website with Round Rock ISD. Thank you again for joining us. We're going to get started here in just a few seconds. I am going to drop into the chat a link that you can access. This will give you information to change the closed captioning into a language that you prefer. So if you prefer Spanish, you can change it to Spanish. If you prefer Hindi or Telugu, you may change it to that language as well. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started tonight. Again, my name is Dr. LaShonda Lewis, and I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Tonight, for Conversations with a School Counselor, we have special guests from Resilient Wilco. We have Ms. Dorothy Light, who is with Bluebonnet Trails, and Ms. Lynn Kessel, who is with Wilco Juvenile Services. They're going to be talking with us tonight about brain development and how to have those conversations with your children. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Dorothy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Just a quick note about Resilient Wilco. We are a community collaborative. We're sponsored by the Health District at Healthy Williamson County, and Emily Hayes is on the presentation as well. She hosts our website, so lots of follow-up information will be posted there. But basically, we're a group of teachers, educators, parents, professionals, counselors, working together to really reduce the impact of stress and trauma across Williamson County. This presentation is going to be a brief overview of the work that we're learning about. We want to share with you what we're finding, what we see works, and there'll be a couple of times in the presentation for questions and things like that. Let's see here. So just briefly, tonight we're going to cover the basics around neuroscience and brain development. We're going to be talking current research around stress and its impact on the brain. And then we're going to start discussing how relationships can be helpful or harmful when mitigating or curbing the impact of stress. This will be a quick overview, but we're going to highlight some key points that we think might be helpful for you. So to get us started, the context we want to provide as we go through this neuroscience information, and believe me, I'm not a neuroscientist, Lynn's not a neuroscientist, we're going to give you the bullet points of what we've learned. And the first thing here is that our memory, our experiences are actually stored in our bodies from the moment of conception. Right there in the womb, our nervous system is growing, our cells are responding already to our environment, to our caregivers. We may not have any memories of these very early formative moments, but they're already beginning to shape who we're going to become and how our brain is going to function.
So let's talk about that nervous system. This nervous system, which is made up of our brain, our spinal cord, and all the peripheral nerves throughout our body, all our neuron connections and nerve cells. This particular system is amazing. It basically takes in all information from so many senses and so forth, everything we're seeing and feeling and smelling and so forth. It takes it in and it interprets it. Our brain will put some meaning to it, and our stress response system will respond appropriately. So Dorothy just mentioned a couple things that we don't even think about anymore that our nervous system does. And that would include breathing and digesting, our heartbeats and so forth. We're not even thinking through those things, but our nervous system is taking care of us in that way, basically in keeping us alive and safe. And based on the experiences, that nervous system will respond, our body will respond. And one of the things that's important to understand is our brain, a key piece to this whole system, is really, as you probably know, is not fully developed until our mid or later 20s. So the brain is growing, developing, new neural connections are happening all the time. And these connections are really important and based on experiences that we have. So if you look at some of these neural connections here, you see at birth that there is some connections, not a lot, it's not real dense, but think about what is it that a baby really needs to know? What do they need to be doing? They need to be breathing, their heart's beating, they're hungry, they're going to communicate that they're hungry, they poop, their functions in life are fairly limited. And so, their connections are limited, but look how dense those neural connections become even in elementary ages. There's many more experiences that young child is having, and that brain is connecting accordingly then. That's called arborization. Like if you think about a tree, it's just growing more little branches and connections and so forth. Now, if you move over onto the puberty section here, you see it's kind of gotten less. There's less dense there. That's not suggesting that at puberty you're losing connections. What it's suggesting is that some of the experiences, if you're not having them anymore, there's no need for these connections, then there's kind of a pruning process that your brain goes through. And so the things that are not used are pruned away. The things that are used quite a bit, or maybe you're in a learning process or whatever, then those connections are dense and thick. I think that's it.
Now, oftentimes we think of those early childhood years from birth through 8 as the sensitive period. And I think as parents, as teachers, we always think about early childhood as a time where the brain grows and develops. But what research is showing is that actually our brain is growing and developing well into our mid to even late 20s, which I don't know about you guys, it gives me lots of hope for my 2 college kids. Their brains are still growing and developing. Here on the left, you see the 5-year-old brain, and the activity, the growth that you want to see is that purple or blue color. So this is our midbrain, our back brain. You see the preteen brain here, certainly more developed. But if you look at that prefrontal cortex, which houses our executive function, our planning and thinking and cognition, that really starts to develop and become fully developed really by the age of about 25. So we can no longer think of that birth through 8 as that sensitive period for brain development. It's really birth through adolescence into young adulthood. Now, here, I want to show you a different type of brain scan. These colors are different. This is a PET scan. And here, you want to see those red and yellow. You want to see the scans light up. Those are indications of neuroactivity. So imagine that neural network that Lynn was talking about throughout the brain, firing as that child processes information. On the left, you see a typically developing brain, very well lit up. On the right, you see a brain of a 2-year-old that suffered extreme neglect. So this is a 2-year-old that hasn't had a lot of those experiences in those relationships like Lynn was talking about. And sure enough, this child's brain architecture grew in response to extreme neglect. And so this is all just to say the brain is going to grow and respond in response to our relationships and to our experiences. And it's certainly going to be impacted by stress.
And so when you've heard both Dorothy and I talk about the impact that experiences have on our brain development, and in looking at that brain scan on the right, that could be potentially disturbing. Here's a young child that maybe has experienced some significant adversity, and you see less activity in certain significant parts of the brain. But this slide is the good news. This is really exciting here because it references the plasticity of our brain. You probably have heard that word, the flexibility or plasticity of our brain. And that's our brain's ability to change. And our brain can change based on new experiences. So if you take a look at this chart, at the bottom, you're going to see age. And what it's talking about is that the brain's ability to change based on new experiences is very high in younger years. If you take a look, it's like all the way up to maybe about age 30. And then it declines. As I think of myself, I'm thinking, oh dear, I'm at the lower end here in terms of my brain's ability to change. But it still can change. It's just going to take a lot more effort than those, if my brain was younger, if I was younger. So this is talking about basically the main message here is that none of us are stuck in any place where our brain may have lost some connections, not connected in a certain way because of a lack of experience. The good news is it really doesn't matter. We can actually alter brain connections and enhance those connections no matter what age you are. If you are older, it might take a little more effort, but it still can happen. And that's the miraculous thing about, our human brains. And so we've been talking about the impact of experiences on our brains, and we have suggested in those brain scans that you can see some pretty significant impact if those experiences are negative. So we want to talk a little bit about stress and sort of make some delineations between types of stress or levels of stress, because some of these may not impact the brain as significantly as others. So let's take a look at these 3 levels. So positive stress, those are real brief increases in heart rate, mild elevations in your stress hormone levels. And some examples of that might be getting nervous before a test, or perhaps you've got a sports event and you're nervous, type thing. Those are short kind of time frames. You're nervous for a little bit. You get through the situation. You're fine afterwards. Typically, you probably can handle it on your own. You just kind of power through or whatever you do to get through that situation. But you might have some helpful friends to help you through those. but it's short time, a short period of time and not something that significantly impacts your stress response system. Now, tolerable is kind of ramping it up a step here. It's more serious, still temporary in terms of your need to respond. Maybe some of these things are a little more long-term, a divorce perhaps in a family, or maybe a financial struggle over a period of time might be examples of something like this. But tolerable is suggesting that those situations are buffered by supportive relationships. So you've got friends or family or some connections that are helping you through these situations. And that's what makes them tolerable and not so impactful on your stress response system. Now, lastly, the toxic stress is really the one that we focus on, because this is the one that is going to have some potential, even long-term effects on our body and our system and so forth. So this would be prolonged activation of the stress response system, but in the absence of protective relationships. So someone might be enduring, something like perhaps abuse, or maybe some neglect, or even bullying, things like this over a long period of time, but without those protective systems to help you get through that. And it's not only protective relationships, but maybe it's things like therapy and such that could be helping you through a situation. Now, the key point about these things is that if in those toxic situations you did have protective relationships, it might flip that to tolerable. If you had a tolerable stressful situation and you really were supported by some strong relationships, or it was very temporary or whatever, that could be flipped into, well, not so bad, maybe it's positive. So the important thing here is that there are protective factors that can help minimize the effect of significant adversities, or what we would call toxic stress. And one of those key ones is protective relationships.
Thanks, Lynn. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about those protective factors tonight, and again on our follow-up presentation. But we wanted to just share a little bit more about stress. One thing to know about stress is that, one, our stress interpretations can differ. We all know this as educators, as parents. Different kids, different adults, we all have different baseline stress levels. The key that we want to put forward tonight is that those baseline stress points get set when we're a child and tend to remain in place throughout our lifetime. So, for example, we might have one child that encounters a stressful situation, maybe a tolerable stressful situation, right? Or maybe it's just stress at home, or stress in the car, or stress in the classroom. We might have one child that can hit that stressor, kind of regroup, maybe take a moment, maybe be able to ask for help. Maybe they can deal with 1, 2, 3 stressful events in that day. Whereas another child might have a very different stress set point. For that child, one stressor might just put them over the edge. And that window of time between the stressful event and when they're just overwhelmed by their experience may be really short.
And don't you use, Dorothy, that's a really good point, isn't the phrase kind of variation is the norm? Just, it's different for every human being, basically, right?
Right. It's just a natural state for us all to have our own. And kind of like what you were saying, Lynn, with the ability to change and the neuroplasticity, while we have kids, especially when they're in the home and young and with us, we can really help mitigate some of that stress and offer support and have a positive impact on that baseline. Although every kid's always going to be unique.
Yeah, yeah, great. Okay, so to elaborate now a bit on Dorothy's point, let's sort of use a very, very simple model here. So let's say at conception and in childhood, the young child lives in a dangerous sort of world, for a lack of a better phrase. It's a childhood experience that may involve lots of toxic stress, things that are very scary to them. They don't know how to handle. They're feeling out of control and so forth. And so what that child's wiring will look like is that they're constantly needing to figure out how to keep themselves safe. And that might look like what we've heard: fight, flight, or freeze. And so that child might be extra vigilant, hyper vigilant, maybe edgy are some examples of what it might look like, maybe quick to respond without thinking through, maybe have a very hard time focusing and so forth. So that's what behaviors might look like if one's brain is wired to constantly be trying to keep themselves safe. And as a result, then, in terms of adult functioning, they're going to do really well in worst case scenarios, tough situations, scary situations, because they've kind of been wired that way. Now, in more of a childhood experience that we might say is safer, then those children are going to have the ability to connect with others, have some trust, feel safe, not have to be on edge all the time. New experiences are not scary to them. They're excited about it. They see it as opportunities and so forth. And so that's what their behaviors might look like. That's how they're adapting to their circumstances and how their brain has wired. And so what they can survive is best case scenarios. In a worse condition sort of situation, they'd probably be pretty vulnerable because they're not so adapted to that kind of an environment. Now, interesting about this very simple model is that both responses are normal. They're adapting to the situation that they're living in. And that's what's so incredible about this nervous system we're talking about, is that it adapts to the environment and the experiences that it is in, and creates responses accordingly in order to maintain safety, and connection as best as possible. It's just depending on their environments, their behaviors may look a little bit different. Now, the problem comes in when our adaptations don't match up with the expectations that child might be facing. So, for example, let's take a young child who maybe has experienced adversity, in their years, and then we put them in school. And when you think about some of the things that we expect in school, we expect them to be paying attention and to be quiet and to be focused and, those sorts of things. Raise your hand, be respectful, when you have a question and so forth. But they're not skilled at that. That's not how they respond. And there may even be things in that classroom or even being in the classroom that triggers them. And so their behaviors aren't going to match the expectations that that type of an environment might have. Now, in the reverse, if I grew up in a safe environment and right out of high school or something, you threw me into being an EMS worker, I would fail. I would not be very good at that. I'm not skilled. Perhaps that wasn't the environment I grew up in. So I won't be adapted to that kind of environment. But here's the exciting news is, see, you can train me. I can go into training and be a very effective EMS worker. But the same thing goes for these kids who have grown up in some adversity and they've adapted accordingly. But we can train them too. We just need to help them build their skills so that they can function very positively in school environments and job environments and all the things that they're going to have to be a part of as they grow older.
Thanks, Lynn.
Sure.
So we want to take a minute here, and the slide is just going to lag a bit. I'm not sure why it's not changing here. But while we do that, just think about expectations at home, expectations of your kids. How is it going? Are there expectations that you feel like that you have? And I've given some suggestions here on this list. Where are you with this expectations? I know COVID at my house, all of these expectations, everything shifted at once. Everybody's stress level is different at any given moment, including mine, right? And so let's take a moment and just think for yourself, write them down, list them out in your head. What are some expectations that you have of your kids right now? And then you may notice that how's their stress level? How's your stress level? Because where they are in their stress response at any given moment is going to impact their ability to meet your expectations. So just wanted to make some connections there to start bringing this information into our relationships and into what's going on at home. Any questions? My understanding is that this is a webinar format. So if you have questions of any of the science we've gone over or any of the concepts we've shared so far, we'd love to just take a moment and let you type those in, and Lynn and I are happy to respond.
I don't see any right now, Dorothy.
Okay, I think then we're going to keep going. So Lynn, do you want to talk a little bit about behavior and expectations?
Sure. So when we're thinking about our nervous system working constantly to keep us safe, and we saw in those two worlds what that might look like, young people that maybe have experienced some adversity may be in sort of a survival mode. They're constantly searching for safety and figuring out how to be safe because they're feeling triggered and unsafe, even in an environment as simple as a classroom. Now, what that might look like on the outside would be somebody perhaps in a youth in a classroom, let's say, who, is disrespectful to the teacher. Maybe stomps out of the classroom, or, even initiates a fight or something. Maybe with a fellow student who said something that didn't have any, intention of making someone feel bad, but it was taken that way. So some of the behaviors on the outside will look like willful disobedience. And what is really, prudent here is that we try to get underneath that a little bit and learn about that child to find out, are you not feeling safe, and what is it that you need right now? The reason why that's so important is, and Dorothy's going to get into this a little later, is the higher part of our brain isn't going to be functioning when that young person is just trying to survive. And we need that higher part of their brain to work in various scenarios. But what's important here is just to notice that sometimes that outside behavior will look very, disrespectful, aggressive, perhaps even violent and so forth. But there's something going on underneath that has to do with that person not feeling safe.
Lynn, thank you for going over this slide. Every time you go over it, it's a good reminder for me. I have two very different children, and one of my kids just feels like he has a knack for pushing my buttons, especially when he was young, more than others. And I noticed with some of my kids, like I would just be more willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. But with my older one, especially if I was stressed, I'd go quick to that willful disobedience. And so I just appreciate you talking about this, because it's just such a good reminder to look underneath that behavior and talk about stress points. And I think someone in the chat was talking about, but how do you even set proper expectations when you have more than one kid? How do you make it fair? Which is a really good question and not an easy one to answer, especially for kids. Kids have some of them have a very concrete idea of what's fair. Fair is the rule of the land. And of course, every situation's different. I don't know that we're going to get into a lot of behavior management techniques so much as an awareness of where is an individual's stress, what is their stress response. So if you have one child with that baby very quick to respond, quick to lose it, baseline stress level, and you have other children with different levels of stress, you might use the same, and I'll put in air quotes, fair, you might use the same behavior modification techniques or the same rules for the house. You have chores, you have, homework, or whatever the responsibilities are. But what we're suggesting is that what we're going to add to that is, where is the child's stress level? Because the child's stress level is going to impact the ability to respond and to be able to implement those behaviors and expectations successfully. And we'll get into this later, but we set aside the whole next presentation after we go through the science. We're going to be talking about getting into those relationships and what are some tools and tips to move forward. So I don't feel like I answered your whole question. That's a lot to get into, but I hope I gave you at least some insight into how we would start looking into that.
I'm glad you brought that up, Dorothy, because I know you had plans for the next time to go over some tools and some strategies, for the parents to be able to practice or use. And it seems like a number of those things, really, when you think about it, they bring the escalation down, because the point is, we want everybody brought back down where you're not having to search for safety and you're not escalated, but there are things that help to bring down the energy level, so then you can engage in whatever discussion or whatever it is that needs to go on in that moment.
Right. And we'll also talk about how to talk to this about kids. It might be that someone can meet an expectation in 5 minutes or 30 seconds, where another kid, it might take a day before they're able to meet that expectation. So we'll talk and share more about how to talk to your kids about this. I don't know why. So we're going to flip this around for a second and talk about what this looks like as parents. So I have a picture of a mom here. Maybe it's just because I'm a mom, but you know, what does survival look like when we're in that mode? I know I can reach it at any given moment, at any given day, right? But I can tell you, my kids can also look at me and they're not seeing willful disobedience, but I know they feel disrespected, or because that's what they'll tell me. Or maybe they'll, you know, I'm not treating them their age. I'm not taking them into account. I'm not listening to them. And it's not my intention. What I'm experiencing is extreme stress. And what they're picking up is, you know, I'm just lecturing and I really don't care about their perspective. So just wanted to put this in here to say that our kids are also interpreting our behavior, and they're making decisions and coming to conclusions about how we're behaving and acting as well. So we're just going to take a minute here and just kind of check in. These are some quick ways. It's a little stress inventory, and these are some quick ways to check in with yourself and say, how is it that I know I'm stressed? And I want to put a caveat here because I can't imagine anyone right now who hasn't had an elevated stress level due to COVID at some point. The challenge is when we ride that gas pedal all the time and we hit those stress levels again and again, high stress levels can feel kind of normal. I don't know if any of you have ever taken a vacation or a long weekend, or maybe grandma or an aunt took the kids for a while and then you realize, wow, I just didn't realize how stressed I was until I took a moment to myself. So it's just a reminder to check in on our own stress level. For me, sometimes I don't realize I'm stressed. In fact, I often will just go through my day. I'm not good at checking in and gauging my stress level. What tells me that I'm stressed are my thoughts and my feelings, and that's an indicator. So for an example, I can calmly talk through my kids about chores or the state of my house, and we can have a great conversation about that, no issue, right? But if I'm stressed and possibly don't know it, I might be talking to them as if loading the dishwasher correctly was a make or break situation for whether or not the family could move forward and have dinner. When I'm in that mode, that's when I think, oh, okay, my stress level just got a little high, kind of back up. So I just share that with you in case stress is a regular part of your life. I just wanted to give you some tips and clues for checking in with yourself. There might be some times of day that are more stressful than others. There also might be some kids or individuals or coworkers that are just more challenging than others. That's very normal. The question is, what is our strategy around that? How are we relating? Are we able to take action to keep those relationships running smoothly? And then this last question is stress impacting my relationship? And I know for me, I can say yes. When I'm stressed, especially now with everyone going to school at home and away and in and out, my stress level and my kids' stress level is really setting the pace for what happens in our relationship these days. One quick note about stress, and again, think about it from an adult point of view and a kid's point of view. When we hit or we exceed that baseline stress level, one of the things that happens is that executive functioning, that prefrontal cortex area of our brain can kind of go offline. So take a look at things that are mentioned here. Are you noticing these things? Is your thinking flexible? Sustained attention? Can you pay attention? How's your memory? Planning, organization, time management? Those can all sound very adult, but if when we have rules in the house or expectations of homework or expectations of communication around friends and who's at what house and who's supposed to be when that individual is stressed, working memory is going to be impacted. The ability to control an emotional response will be impacted. Flexible thinking will be impacted. Maybe one day it's okay to be 5 minutes late, or it's okay to tell me afterwards. But if I'm really stressed, oh, that's not okay. That 5 minutes was up. So this is here really just to bring our attention to some ways to look at how stress might play a role in our level of functioning and in our relationships. One of the things I just want to share for you, and then we'll kind of move away from this point. Literally, when we're stressed, it changes how we view other people, and it can literally change the way we hear them. And I want to give you an example. You could take something as simple as I didn't say you took a cookie. I didn't say you took a cookie. Easy, no issue. I didn't say you took the cookie. Or I didn't say you took the cookie. Do you see how inflection just changes the meaning of so many situations? Maybe that looks like, I didn't say you didn't listen to me. Or I didn't say you weren't listening. Maybe that was your dad, right? So when we're stressed, it changes our perception, it changes our understanding of what's being said, and it impacts our ability to see others. So up here you see growth mindset, right? And a fixed mindset. Stress takes us to that fixed mindset. This has been a problem. This is always going to be a problem. My kids aren't listening. They're not meeting expectations. My partner's not backing me up here. My partner never backs me up. All of those things are stress response and thinking. So for me, remember how I said I have a pretty high stress level. And so I might not notice that I'm actually stressed, but when I start thinking this way, now I know. And my thoughts are often my first clue. Now, if it's a great day, if nothing can go wrong, just win the lottery kind of feeling, then my kids or my partner or my coworker can act the exact same way, say the exact same things, and all of a sudden they can learn it. It's okay. I'm frustrated, but I think we're going to make it through. You know what? I'm up for the challenge. I can do this. And the kids are the same way. That growth mindset comes from a more relaxed and calm nervous system, and they'll be able to see their parents or their friends or their teachers in a much more open, integrated, and healthy way. So,
And Dorothy, I just want to add something to what
yes,
you had like a little gold nugget in there as you were talking about this fixed mindset. So if you're noticing yourself having those kind of thoughts when you're dealing with your child or dealing with your partner or whatever, just in a very non-judgmental way, just pause and be curious. and just ask yourself, I wonder what's going on with me, because I'm kind of over there right now. So, and explore and be compassionate with yourself. You may be very stressed and therefore not interacting well, even yourself. But what a great tool to use as a check, as a personal check, to just, where am I? Am I over here? And if so, what am I stressed about, and how can I deal with that before I go engage with my child or my partner or whatever. So thank you for that, Dorothy. That was good.
Sure. And you know, another quick hack, if as a parent you're noticing you're in a high stress situation, and yet maybe there's an issue or a conversation that's happening right then, right? One of the ways is to just check in and say, did I hear you? Like literally repeat back to them, not because you didn't hear them, you heard what they said, right? I didn't say I took the cookie. You heard what they said, but what you're not sure about is their tone or what they meant by it. So just checking in, even it sounds so simple, and even as a communication tool, it can seem a little awkward, but it will help. Did I hear you? Did you mean to say this? Am I hearing you correctly? That sometimes is enough just to buy some time and go over that. Even young kids can work with this. I wanted to pause here. We're almost to the end of the presentation, and we do have just a little bit more information for you, and talking about, you know, what's going to be in our next session. But I just wanted to pause here and see if there are any questions or any comments from you guys. Lynn and I always learn when people ask questions, and so we just want to encourage you to do so.
Dorothy, it looks like we have one question, and it says, do you have additional trainings for families?
We're working on developing that now, and how you will know when we have it developed, because we'll post it to the website. And Dr. Lewis stays pretty on top of a lot of things that are going on out in the county. So when we get that together, we'll be happy to share. But please come back to our presentation on the 22nd. Now that we have this brain science sort of laid out and we're able to take some of these perspectives, we'll be able to take a deeper dive and share with you. Some of them are therapy tools, some of them are common sense tools, but they align with the neuroscience that we're sharing, and we're happy to share this with you. So these are going to sound obvious. I'm sure we've all heard them a million times. I've heard them a million times, and sometimes remember them and sometimes don't. But when you do find yourself or your child or your teen in that high stress situation, the first thing to do is just recognize it for what it is. It's stress. Sometimes we go quick to that problem solution mode, or like Lynn was talking about, we're interpreting it before words are coming out of our mouth. We're interpreting it disobedience or disrespect or not listening. And what really is happening is there's a communication, and the communication is, I'm very stressed. So a quick tip to de-stressing is to actually recognize when you are stressed, naming the emotion you're feeling and learning to recognize patterns. Again, it sounds so simple, but I bet if each one of us took our phone out and set a timer, and that timer went off every half hour throughout an 8-hour day or a 10-hour day, and we named the emotion we're feeling, I bet you we would all find that challenging. We get so focused on doing and accomplishing and taking care of everything that we forget to check in. So even the neuroscience tells us that when we're in a high stress response, just the act of sort of leaning back from ourselves, leaning out of the moment, and naming the emotion we're feeling actually engages our prefrontal cortex and calms down the nervous system. So please don't underestimate that. And for kids, you can almost encourage them, especially if they're young, they love to be emotional detectives. They can guess how you're feeling right now. My kids always say mad. That was their word for stressed. You're mad, you're mad. And of course I wanted to say, no, 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 I'm stressed. Yeah, but then I would just get mad. But naming the feelings, it's a key to being able to communicate about stress. And even have your kids take an inventory every hour. What was the emotion? What was the stress level? You can even pick a scale, 1 to 10, 1 to 5. Where's your stress level? That recognition alone will open doors for a conversation and for changing patterns that are, reoccurring in our family relationships. And take action. This is another one. It sounds so simple, but we can all get caught up in what time is it? What do we have to finish? What do we have to do? And we recognize that we're stressed. We know we're angry. And then darned if we don't move forward anyway, doing and saying the exact same thing. So some really quick strategies: breathing, walking, exercise, relaxing. It really is what works for you. For some people, high activity calms them down. For other people, complete silence and walking away is going to help bring them back to normal. Know what works for you. Ask your kids, hey, when you're really stressed, what's the thing that helps you most? This could be a great dinner conversation. I will say that having these conversations when you're not stressed is really helpful. Right, Lynn? Like, how many kids do you work with? If you're waiting to have these conversations when there's like war has been declared or items have been thrown or the bad grade hit the email, it's a little late to have these conversations. Having them when you're not stressed will really help you negotiate those moments where you are. And then the Q-tip here is just sort of a clever way of reminding it really isn't personal. It's something unique to all individuals. It's something we all have. It impacts how we function and how we see the world. And yet we don't often talk about it. So these are some quick and easy tips for things to start looking at now. We also talk, and Lynn, I don't know if you have this conversation where you talk about self-care, and all the moms are like, self-care, self-care. Teachers talk about this a lot. We have to do the self-care. But one of the concepts I like is co-care, especially for families. If you know what calms you down, do you know what calms your other family members down? And that is something that's very helpful, because if you see their stress and you had the conversation already and you know what calms them down, you might be able to go right to it.
Yeah.
So those are some tips for you right now. This slide here is just a reminder that how we intervene, how we talk to each other, how we show up in relationships can often be the difference in someone's tolerable, positive, or toxic stress. Relationships are really the number one buffer when it comes to lowering our stress level. And we just wanted to share a little bit about what we're going to be talking about next time, which is relationships. How to bring safety into those high stress moments, how to maintain those meaningful connections while you're maybe talking through some of the behavior issues or consequence issues. You might use different language with kids of different ages. I know someone was asking about that earlier, but the key talking points that align with the science, they're going to be the same whether you're, 3 or 30 or beyond. And then skill building. We'll share some skills and some quick hacks for things that you can start working with now. I know our time is almost up. Lynn, I just talked on and on and on through that last slide, but I just wanted to, is there anything that you wanted to chime in around?
I think the only thing I wanted to reinforce, Dorothy, that you said is these 3 items here. In order to have that discussion with your child or your partner, you've got to have the safety and you've got to have a meaningful connection. Otherwise, that conversation won't go well. And that's got to be on both sides, that you're both feeling that. So what is safety? That's like you trust each other, like you feel comfortable and you trust each other. Meaningful connection, that the other person feels they belong. Like you guys are really connecting and you got each other's back, sort of thing. So once you can establish those things, then the discussions, the coaching, the teaching, and so forth that needs to happen will come much easier than if you're trying to do it when things are escalated and not in a good place.
Agreed. I can't emphasize that enough. And I keep going back to those neural networks you were showing. These are the types of skills and strategies that get hardwired into our brain that our kids can really take with them throughout their life and into their other relationships. And it's a cornerstone for resilience. It's a cornerstone for hitting those challenges and knowing how to navigate them. And it's not just brain health, it's connection with your kids or your partner or yourself. So I appreciate you emphasizing that. Do we have time, Dr. Lewis, for any questions?
We do have a couple more minutes left.
Okay.
There's questions out there. There was one question in the question and answer, and it was, when is the next session? So our next session will be held on the 22nd of February at 6 p.m. and you'll be able to use this same Zoom link.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lewis. I just want to appreciate you and giving us the time to be able to share this great information. Dorothy and I have a blast doing this. So.
Well, we absolutely thank both of you for joining us this evening and giving this great information out to our parents across our district. Parents that are still in attendance, this information will be shared on our counseling services website. We did record it this evening, so it should be on our website by this time tomorrow evening if you want to view it again or if you would like to share it with some friends that weren't able to make it tonight.
Awesome.
I don't see any other questions, so Lynn and Dorothy, would you like to close this out?
Sure. I just want to say, as we go on this journey and we start thinking about our stress levels and our relationships and things like that, it's really important to remember to try not to judge ourselves or others. Everybody is really doing the best we can. And if we listen and take in this information through the lens of what did I do wrong, or I knew someone was doing something wrong, and it's really not helpful. It's that growth mindset that keeps us moving forward. And as parents, we're hit by a million things all the time. So I just want to say thank you to every parent who's out there trying to do their best for their kids, and always, always, always just give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. And when we do this introspective work, or when we share tools, it's really just important to use what we can when we can, and not go back and judge ourselves.
That's perfect, Dorothy. I have nothing to add. That's perfect.
Thank you, guys.